Well, it has been an offseason for the history books. We are still 9 weeks away from the start of the college football season, and we have yet another breaking news story that is reaping havoc in the college football landscape as we know it. Unless you've been in a coma for the last 48 hours, you are by now aware that that UCLA and USC will be, the two California schools, will be moving to the Big Ten. Their closest conference opponent is going to be over 1,500 miles away. Well, that doesn't seem to matter in the new world of money and NIL and everything else that is sweeping through college football, which seems to be focused the least of all on football itself. That doesn't seem to matter in this modern world, and USC and UCLA are going to be moving to the Big Ten. What does this mean for college football? But more importantly, what does it mean for the Mountain West? Obviously, I say more importantly as a Boise State fan, but that is the conference that is going to be most impacted by these events. Ripple effects through college football for sure, but the Mountain West is going to feel these in a tremendous way, and there is going to be an opportunity coming up here for some Mountain West schools to potentially move in finally up into the Power 5, something that hasn't happened since TCU left for the Big 12. So let's talk about what does this conference realignment mean for the Mountain West. Well, first off, just breaking down the news that we saw just yesterday come across, we saw a report come out that USC and UCLA were thinking about moving. That was just an insider report. And within hours of that, literally by the end of the day, it had been officially announced that the Big Ten had accepted USC and UCLA's application to join. The Pac-12 came out with an announcement this morning basically saying blah, 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 nothing. We're disappointed. We're working to look to expand and to grow. Basically, they didn't even use that specific language. But the Pac-12 is reeling. They have no idea how to react to this. Well, if they don't react soon, they are going to be in for a world of hurt because there's already reports coming out right now that the Big 12, who is becoming much more aggressive, they said they want to be aggressive. They say they are actively seeking out new members, are looking into talks between Arizona State, Arizona, Colorado, and Utah. So that Pac-12 could be down 6 more members, which would, as they were already a 12-team conference, would leave them with only half of their members before any of this news breaks. So if the Pac-12 does not move aggressively, it does not move quickly to solidify itself, to shore up its losses, there is a chance here that by the time 2024 rolls around, the Pac-12 won't even exist. That is mind-blowing because you're talking about a conference that is the second oldest conference in the country, active conference in the country, established in 1915. And USC, UCLA, basically founding members of that conference. They joined in the 1920s, USC in 1922 and UCLA in 1928. So almost 100 years in the Pac-12, and now it's over, done. It's good to see you. Bye. They're off to the Big Ten. So Pac-12 is on the brink of extinction here if it does not move quickly. We're going to break down 2 potential scenarios that I see coming out of all of this, and we'll talk about what these 2 scenarios mean for the Mountain West. The first scenario is Pac-12 is able to shore up its membership. They're able to establish confidence. They're able to build back up. They're able to reestablish themselves. They're able to shore up their membership and not lose any of the members. So Oregon, Washington, they don't look for the door. Arizona State, Arizona, whoever's talking to the Big 12 says, okay, we're going to stay. We're happy where we are. That is the first option here. Definitely, I would probably call this the best case scenario option for the Pac-12 and even for the Mountain West. And I'll talk about why here in a second. So Pac-12 doesn't lose any members. It maintains the members it has, 10 teams. Now, 10 teams, that's not enough. Pac-12 was already the second or tied for the smallest conference in the Power 5. Compared to the other conferences, SEC now up to 16, ACC was already at 14, Big Ten was at 14, now they're up to 16. So the Pac-12 with 10 members is now the smallest conference in the Power 5. And it's not going to work out like they did for the Big 12. They cannot survive as as just 10 members. The Pac-12, even with the 12-member institutions, has not been seen as a strong institution in the Power 5. There's a lot of reasons for this. I chalk a lot of it up to the East Coast bias. All the games are late. The larger populations are on the East Coast and the central part of the U.S., so talking Big Ten country and then the SEC. And of course, Pac-12 doesn't benefit from Texas, which really helps keep the Big 12 afloat, even though they're not necessarily benefiting from that East Coast side of things. They don't have the populations, they don't have the numbers, and they don't have the clout when it comes to popular opinion to stay at at 10 members like the Big 12 was able to for a period of time before losing them. And even if that was something the Big 12 was able to do and the Pac-12 could replicate it, that is something that would have happened in the past. In the modern era of college football, everything's shifting. If you want to keep your membership together, you have to present yourself as a strong conference, and 10 members is not going to do it. So Pac-12, if they're able to stay together, is going to have to add 2 more members if it wants to stay relevant. If it doesn't, Oregon and Washington will be gone in the first opportunity that they get, especially Oregon. So we're talking here 2 members. You've got to add at least 2. Now, this is not as big a hit as when Texas and Oklahoma left the Big 12. UCLA, USC, historic institutions, part of the Pac-12 for a very long time. USC, of course, very, very good in the early 2000s. Has not been the case here in the last 10 years. USC has only had 3 10 or more win seasons in the last 10 years. UCLA has only had 3 10 or more win seasons in the last 20 years. So not the same comparison when you're talking about Oklahoma, a team that was competing always for the top of their conference, was competing for those Power 5 games, was putting their names into playoff consideration, into national championship contention. That is not what we're looking at when we're talking about USC and UCLA in the modern era, the last 15 years, even the last obviously prior to 2010, USC very good, but after the regulations hit them, hasn't been the same. A lot of hype, of course, with Lincoln Riley, but that's just hype. We haven't seen anything from that right now. This is not the same thing as losing Texas and Oklahoma. Pac-12, Big 12 had to add 4 members to make up for the 2 members they lost. Pac-12 theoretically could add 2, and that would be enough. Now, here's the options that they've got here. When they're talking about, I think San Diego State, is definitely in. I think San Diego State, if the Pac-12 makes the right decisions here and adds 2 members, San Diego State is definitely going to be in. Centrally located in the Pac-12 belt already. A California team, you lose a California team, you add a California team. They're building a brand new multi-million-dollar stadium. They're investing in their program. It just makes sense. And of course, they're good in both basketball and football, which is definitely a combination for them. Now, the second team to get added, I think it's a real toss-up here. Obviously, as a Boise State fan, I want to say Boise State, and Boise State definitely deserves it. It should be Boise State. But I think it comes down between Boise State and Fresno State. Fresno, better located. Again, another California team. A team that's also had good success, especially in their football program. Boise State and Fresno State, always those 2 teams that are competing there at the top of the Mountain West, have met multiple times in the Mountain West Championship game. I think it's going to come down between Boise State and Fresno State. If the Pac-12 wants to say, hey, we lost 2 Cali teams, let's add 2 Cali teams, maybe Fresno State gets in over Boise State. Now, I think Boise State's recent success in the basketball is going to be part of their saving grace here, because it definitely adds another card to the table. But I'm not sure it's going to be enough. Boise State has been looked over so many times in the past, it's not a given. They should have been part of the last round of Big 12 expansion. They weren't. And the Big 12 should have expanded and included them before they lost Oklahoma and Texas, and they didn't. So it's not a given. Boise State, the big hit against them, of course, is the academic stuff. I always say that is stupid. In the modern world of college football, the academics really don't matter. If you build your football program, if you put the money into the football program, if you become a Power 5, your academics will follow eventually. Because the main money raiser, besides from donors, as far as athletics go, is your football program. So if your football program's having success, your academics are going to show from that. And Boise State has improved in its academics as its football program has improved as well. So I don't think that should be a holdout. But of course, Pac-12, stingy, has always had their noses in the air. They can't afford to do that right now. They have to make the right moves for their future. I think Boise State would be the best choice for them, but I think there is a chance that Fresno State edges them out. Now, we talk about only adding 2 members. Realistically, they should add 4. Even if they add 2, they get back to 12. Even if those 2 members are suitable replacements for the teams that they lost, they're still just back where they were before. A team that's been consistently locked out of a conference that's been consistently locked out of the playoffs, a conference that's consistently being looked down on, overlooked. Pac-12, part of the reason is a lot of stuff they can't control. That East Coast bias, the time slots, a lot of things that they can't control, populations, all of that. But something they can control is appearance overall, and seeing them and being one of these smaller Power 5 conferences tied for where they were tied for smallest, and if they only add 2 members, they'll still be tied for the smallest. They need to get to at least 14 members, especially in an age where you're now looking at SEC and ACC with 16. You're sitting there with 12. That is not a good comparison overall when you're looking at power imbalance between the conferences. So they need to add 4 teams. I think we could definitely see them adding San Diego State, Boise State, Fresno State, and potentially Colorado State as well. again, don't have the athletic success necessarily, but they have been investing. They've been putting in the money. They brought in a great coaching staff. We might see some improvements in their athletic success this year, but that is a school that has the potential to be Power 5 worthy. Their name has been thrown around consistently when it's come to conference expansion. I think they're definitely an option that will be looked at here. Pac-12, if they want to survive, has to add at least 2, and 4 if they want to regain relevance in the national stage. Now, that's scenario 1. That's best case scenario. Now, cataclysmic end of the world stuff could happen here very easily for the Pac-12, especially if they don't move quickly. Really, the difference between scenario 1 and scenario 2 is how Pac-12's leadership reacts. If they're quick right now, if they have I think honestly, if they want to keep their conference, if they want to keep scenario 1, they need to get Boise State, Fresno State, San Diego State, whoever they're going to add, they need to do it in the next week to 2 weeks. That's how quick we're talking right now. That's how quick this cycle is. If they don't do that, something is going to happen here that they are not going to like, and that's scenario 2. Big 12 strikes. Big 12 takes Arizona State, Arizona, Colorado, and Utah. Now, while none of those teams, except for maybe Utah, are necessarily groundbreaking great teams, they are 4 teams, which when you're already a small conference, that's a big number to take a chunk out of. And that would take the Pac-12 down to 6 teams. It would devastate them. Pac-12 would be left with, it would be crippled. Now, if they could hold on to the members that they have, the 6 remaining members, and not keep them looking for the door, there might be an option for recovery, but it would not be an option to recover back to where they were previously. The conference that reemerged would be a skeleton of its former self. So if this happened, I think that we've kind of looking at 2 options out of scenario 2 for the Pac-12. The first option, the Pac-12 manages to convince the remaining members, which again, listening to this list, this is not necessarily a prestige list. Oregon, Washington, Washington State, Cali, Oregon State, and Stanford. Now, obviously, Oregon and Washington, 2 top members, and I think as long as those 2 members are in this conference, as long as Oregon and Washington are in the Pac-12, regardless of who else is in the conference will still maintain its status as Power 5 in the overall perspective of the country. But if they are unable to keep those 2 members, if they're gone, then the teams that remain, Washington State, Cali, Oregon State, Stanford, without this framework around them, they're not considered top level, truly Power 5 alone teams. They're not going to be teams that you're going to look at and say, okay, who else is in their conference with them, just on their own abilities, and say that's going to be a Power 5 conference. So if the Pac-12 can keep Oregon and Washington and add 6 Mountain West teams to replace the devastating loss of 6 teams that they've lost out of their own conference, if they can add Boise State, Fresno State, San Diego State, Colorado, the 4 teams we talked about previously, and then a mixture of, I believe, San Jose State, Nevada, Utah State, or Wyoming, 2 out of those 4, throw them into the huddle. I'd love to get Air Force in there. Of course, I am also a big Air Force supporter. I just don't think that they're going to be a team necessary in the way that college football works and the way that money gets thrown around. I just don't think that an academy school is going to be looked at for a Power 5 option. So that's why they're not on the list. As far as what they put on the field, definitely should be considered. As far as what they bring, as far as being an academy school, I don't think they're going to be an option. So I think that they would take the 4 teams I named previously and then add a San Jose State, California school. Of course, not a great university as far as athletics goes, but California school, and of course, you start putting them in a Power 5 conference, giving them the money, maybe they're able to improve. Nevada has shown some success. Utah State won the conference last year. Wyoming has been one of those up-and-coming schools that has shown a lot of success. Again, none of those 4 are necessarily ideal. You think about, oh yeah, that makes sense in the Pac-12, but we're talking about a universe where things have been flipped on their heads. I think we would see the 4 I mentioned previously, Boise State, Fresno State, San Diego State, Colorado State, definitely in, and then 2 out of those 4 previously. And Pac-12 manages to stay together through a lot of aggressive marketing, manages to keep its Power 5 name out there, and maybe, but still would be a shadow of its former self. The other option, and this is a very interesting option, something that people have floated as almost a joke in the past, but now becomes an actual possibility. Now, I think of everything that I've suggested, this is probably the least likely scenario. But if Oregon and Washington bounce, if they're gone, if they make a deal, if they cut their own deal with the Big Ten, which would take them to 18 teams and a super conference standards that we've never seen before, if they cut their own deals somewhere else with some other Power 5 conference and they're gone, then I think we could see something very, very almost humorous happening where the Mountain West absorbs the remaining Pac-12 members. And the Pac-12, again, one of the historic founders. You can't even think about college football without the Pac-12, really, when you think about the history of college football, would cease to exist. California, Oregon State, Stanford, and Washington State would slide into the Mountain West, would push the Mountain West to 16 teams, and the Mountain West would now make their case as the Power 5 conference, with the Pac-12 gone, would make their case as the Power 5 conference on the West Coast, would attempt to acquire the Rose Bowl as part of their conference lineups, would attempt to expand their bowl games, and attempt to build their name as the Power 5. Now, the biggest hurdle to all of this, the biggest thing that makes this less likely to happen, isn't the teams in the conference, isn't the scenario that I've laid out. It's the Mountain West leadership. The Mountain West leadership is the worst conference leadership in the entire country. And I just don't think they have the gumption or the abilities or the motivation necessarily to go out and make this happen, to advocate as a Power 5. They're not Power 5 worthy. The Mountain West teams, the conference as a whole, Power 5 worthy. But they've been outstripped by East Coast teams, such as East Coast conferences, such as the American Athletic Conference, even recently pushing within the Sun Belt Conference, because the Mountain West Conference leadership sits on its butts and does nothing. It does nothing to promote its teams in the national perspective. It does nothing to promote the idea that the Mountain West is Power 5 or Power 6 worthy like the American Athletic Conference does, and it does nothing to promote its best teams across the country. That is the biggest hurdle to success for the Mountain West in general. Isn't the scenarios going on, isn't the teams in place, it's the leadership that is in place. However, if we could overcome the hurdles of our own leadership, this option here, where Mountain West adds 4 Pac-12 teams, creates a scenario where the Mountain West could insert itself into that place, finally receiving the recognition it deserves as a Power 5 member. Now, of everything that I've listed 2 scenarios. One, Pac-12 manages to stay together, adds 2 teams from the Mountain West. Again, like I said, San Diego State for sure, and then probably Fresno State or Boise State. My bias would like to say Boise State, but my logic, my rationale as an analyst would think that Fresno State might have a leg up, and Sports Illustrated said something similar as well. Now, that's the best case scenario. That's the most likely scenario. However, if the Big 12 is successful, if they offer something very attractive, if they are aggressive, which they want to be, if they are able to push the Pac-12, if the Pac-12 is slow, if the Mountain West schools are slow in accepting offers if they receive them, if the Mountain West schools are slow in approaching and reaching out and trying to get those offers, if the Pac-12 doesn't reach out and is not aggressive and is not fight for its life mode trying to stay together, I think there's a good possibility, not the strongest possibility, but a good possibility that the Big 12 sweeps in, cripples the Pac-12, and then we see the other scenarios that I pushed forward previously. I think in that case, the most likely option, if the Big 12 destroys the Pac-12, I think the most likely option is that Oregon and Washington, with the donors that they have pushing them with the finances, I mean, Oregon's basically run by Nike right now. They're not going to stick around in a crippled conference. They've barely been happy sticking around in the current Pac-12. I'm surprised that the team moving is UCLA and USC. That's shocking. I would have thought it would have been Oregon pushing their way out. I think if the Pac-12 is crippled and loses these members that the Big 12 is pushing for, even if it only loses 2 of those members, I think Oregon takes the first bus out. They are on the first one out of there and headed towards Big 10 or somewhere else. They have the money to pay to transport their athletes across the country. That's not a concern. And I don't think that time zones and geographic positioning even matters anymore in the way that college football conferences are being designed. It's absolutely nuts. So I think if the Pac-12, which like I said is the most likely option, is unable to stay together, I think that we will see a case where the Big 12 strikes, cripples the conference, and the Mountain West then becomes the primary alternative to absorb the refugees from the crippled Pac-12 ship. Thank you so much for watching this video. As you can see on the board here, I have an exciting video coming up with former Boise State kicker Tyler Rausa. I'm very excited for this opportunity to interview a former Boise State athlete, a former Boise State legend truly in his own right. And I'm excited for this opportunity to talk about the Boise State special teams as I continue my preview of the Boise State 2022 football team. Make sure you like, subscribe so you don't miss out on any of these videos I'm going to be doing with these former Boise State players. The link to those videos are in the description. Thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know what you think. Let me know what your predictions are. And as always, go big!